because as human beings, we get like one life and one identity. And I feel like with my job, I've sort of found a hack to also get like other perspectives and feel like, okay, I can also walk in other people's shoes. So if you yourself, it's very important that you yourself as a therapist can look at someone, even if they're rock bottom, and you can see and you can imagine their best self.
Realize deeply that the present moment is all you ever have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. While the past gives you an identity and the future holds the promise of fulfillment, neither of them truly exist. Life is now and only now. Louisa, this is the book, The Power of Now, that I just read a passage from, written by Eckhart Tolle, and it's a so-called guide to spiritual enlightenment. I've read this book and I liked it a lot, and it focusing on now and not too much the future or the past, which is something that a lot of people have a hard time with, including me. Mm-hmm. And considering your background as a psychologist, I thought you would like it.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to keep it for now, and
thanks a lot.
I'll give it to you at the end of the podcast.
Appreciate it.
What's our relationship, Lisa? Because I think it's good for people that are watching this podcast to know what we are from each other, so people have an idea of the context of this podcast. Yeah,
I think it's good for people to know that we're brother and sister. So, as we said before, we know each other very well. And it's funny to have a conversation in this setting because we have so many conversations in, let's say, a more informal setting. But that doesn't mean that we can't do it like this.
100%. I think something that's exciting for me, is to see the way you have evolved. Also on the level of like social media and how you use it. Because it's not the first time you sit in our studio, right?
Yeah, that's true. We've also done it before in your living room, a long time ago. We did our very first podcast, and now a few years later, here we are again.
And you've even made videos here for your own psychology account, right?
That's true.
For your own psychology.
Yeah, that's true. I've also made videos here, kind of individual videos where we record me and where I share knowledge about psychology. So by now, the people that follow me on Instagram have seen those videos.
Amazing. Louisa, in this podcast, of course, we've done a podcast before, but that was a long time ago. And also back then, I think I wasn't as skilled as an interviewer as I am now. I think it's good for people that don't know you, because for a lot of people, it will be the first time that they actually hear you from our new listeners base. I want to zoom in on who you are, what you do, and how you got where you are now, and all the lessons that you've learned from being a psychologist and having done all these things that you've done. Of course, there's more than just you being a psychologist. And I think a good starting point to start the story, because of course we can move all the way back to the youth, but I already know everything, so it'll be a bit weird. I think a good point to start would be when you started high school. Is that the right word? And then you went to uni?
Yeah.
And there you picked a study.
Right.
How did that go?
So when I was in high school, I had to make a choice of what I wanted to study. And I have very broad interests, so a lot of things seemed very interesting to me. And at that time, I thought, well, I found law particularly interesting, like the content of those studies, the moral dilemmas. I'm a pretty good writer, so I thought, okay, this could be a good path for me. And I went on and I did the first weeks of that study, and I thought, oh, this is very challenging for me because it's a lot of learning things by heart. I found it very difficult, and I think it just didn't really suit the way that I was thinking. I felt like I couldn't really get creative with it. And I wasn't getting good grades also, and for the first time in my life, because at school, like in high school, I would be a very good student, and then at uni, I was getting really low grades, like lower than 5s and lower than 3s even, I think. So that was like really a shock for me, even though I was trying. And so at that point, I had to make a decision. Do I want to continue, or do I want to see if I can do something else? And I discussed it with our parents, and I made the choice to choose something else.
What did you pick?
Yeah, at that moment, I thought I definitely want to do something that I'm good at, and that where I can also be a bit more creative. So at that
Actually,
point,
wait, before we move on to what you picked, what do you
sure.
think is important for, because a lot of people that are listening are actually now in this exact stage.
Oh,
They might be at a stage in their high school where they might have to already start looking for what study they want to do because it's so decisive. There's a book
Yeah,
of
right?
Naval Ravikant, which is the almanac of Naval Ravikant. This very interesting guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he says the three most important decisions in your life.
Yeah.
And he also has a psychology background, I think, or at least he talks like it.
Cool. Yeah.
He said the three most important decisions in life is where you live,
Yeah.
who you marry,
Yeah.
and the career paths you take.
Yeah.
So, and of course, where you live and who you end up marrying, those are things that actually happen like late 20s, begin
Later,
30s.
right.
Like then, that's when you start settling down.
Yeah.
Might get children, of course. You can do it at the way you want, but in
Yeah.
general, 20s, 30s is. But when it comes to studying,
Yeah.
especially in Holland, you have to
Right.
choose at a very young age what path you have to follow.
Yeah.
What do you think are some tools that, or some things people should look at when they want
Yeah.
to pick a career or a certain, a certain path that they will have to pursue for the rest of the time? Because of course in Holland to study, when you're doing uni or even when you're doing HBO,
Mhm.
like it's going to be like 3 years of your bachelor and then you're going to have to specialize for another 2-3 years. It's a
Yeah.
lot of time that you're investing into it.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very big commitment. So what I always advise, like when I speak with younger people, is to really do your research properly, because we can like go to open days and look at websites, and things can look very interesting on the outside. And what I personally did is that you then kind of fill it in with your own ideas that you have about the subject matter, without really knowing what it really entails on the day-to-day and the nitty-gritty of the study. So I would really advise people to put in a lot of work in researching if it's about a career choice and what that career really looks like by, for example, already ordering the books of that study, by speaking with people who do the job that you could do later, and by asking detailed questions to really get a good idea of what it entails. And then you can make an informed decision on, okay, does this suit me? Does this spark my interest?
Very good advice. I think you also
Thanks.
recommended me at some point, we were doing it for Giving Back.
Yeah.
Shout out to Giving Back.
Yeah.
Which is like an organization that helps people to develop themselves in the
Yeah.
professional career.
We both were part of Giving Back.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it had such a good way because we had like a mentor,
Yeah.
and that mentor was someone that is like they will match you with a mentor. And of course, not every country has something like Giving Back, but you can find the mentor.
Mhm.
I think people are always willing to help, but you have to ask them.
Yeah, I agree.
And I ended up at some point, I realized, like, I sent one message on LinkedIn to someone that was doing, at the time, he was doing real estate.
Mm-hmm.
I like real estate. People are dressed nicely. Their hair slicked back. They're driving a nice car. I was like, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah.
That might be a good career path.
Right.
And I ended up speaking to three to four people that were working on the Zuidas, which is like the place to be in Holland when you want to do real estate.
Mm.
And I decided for myself, this is not the path that I want to do now.
Yeah.
But I could only make that decision because I talked to those people. I think that was your advice as well.
Yeah,
Like
right.
I really spent a day with them. Like
Yeah.
I in the morning,
That's awesome,
I
yeah.
went to their house and I was like, can you drive me to your work? I talked with them. They took me to the work. Everyone at the work was like, oh, so cool. Someone that's young and wants to get like more information about the studies and the work.
Mhm.
But people always want to help, but you have to like tell them like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm looking right now for my future. I
Yeah.
want to get an idea of like what's possible. And he was like, yeah, just come with me, like day in the life.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's so good. I did the same thing with a photographer. I did the same thing with someone that was doing crypto mining. One guy that was doing trading, and the photographer ended up being the one that I liked the most.
Cool.
Even though he wasn't making the most money and everything, but he was like, he was creative and he could always do like his own things and he had his own schedule. And that for me was like, oh, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And didn't end up being a photographer, but like at that point I chose a path and I started learning more about it, and then you can evolve. But
Yeah.
it's a good way to have like a starting point.
Yeah, for sure.
And
yeah.
and you did that as well. And what did you end up choosing after your research?
Yeah. So I actually, because I have broad interests, I also chose to do several things in my studies. So I studied French linguistics and literature. I studied psychology. Then I did several masters in psychology and linguistics. I got a teaching qualification. And everything kind of worked out altogether, also because I found those things very interesting. And then I went on to mostly work as a psychologist. And even within psychology, I then also, because I find it so interesting, I can't just commit to one field, and I decided to learn about all the different aspects of it. So educational psychology, organizational psychology, systemic therapy. I find it, all those things very interesting, and also the intersections between, what you learn, for example, as a systemic therapist, and how you can apply that in an organization.
I think what's also really cool about you is that you're still always learning.
Yeah.
Like I've always had the idea for myself, I want to finish my studies and then I need to work.
Right.
But now I just got my bachelor and I was like, actually for 2 years I want to do some work, and maybe perhaps later I want to do a master. And because I saw that, I never told you this, I think, but because I'm seeing you still doing like these courses on the side, or you do then like a master class with like some special therapist that knows something specifically very well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so cool because of course you have your degrees and you can work at any instance that you want, all your qualifications, but you still choose to learn, not because you need it, but because you want it.
Yeah.
And by doing that, like you get better over time. That's not something that you will see, I think. You won't get a good ROI on that, or it's not about, what do I get from this? It's because you fell in love with like the field.
Yeah.
It's always good to learn new things, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I feel like what I get from it, I definitely do get something from it. Maybe it's not measurable in financial gains, even though it's also an investment, you could say, for later. But it's definitely an enrichment in terms of how I spend my time and excitement and interest. I'm a very curious person, so I like to satisfy that curiosity.
What do you like most about your day-to-day now? Because, of course, now you work mainly as a psychologist.
Yeah.
What does a day in your life actually look like? Let's start with that.
Yeah. So I do a lot of therapy sessions, as you can imagine. And a day in my life is a lot of conversations with people, with a lot of different people, a lot of different situations, individuals, but also groups. So maybe a family, couples.
You've done companies as well, right?
Yeah, and companies as well,
Wow.
working with companies who need like a psychological input, who need my expertise in any way.
I've heard this like a few times, and I was like, like if you pick psychology or you pick this study or that study, you'll never have a job.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Right? It's a true thing.
It's a cliche. Yeah, you hear that a lot. Yeah.
What is your view on that? Because of course, like you've picked it and you got really good at it. I believe whatever field you choose, even if it's waste management or what else, if you become the best, there will always be work at all times. But we're talking about psychology now. Like, how is that for you?
Yeah, I've heard very often that they said, the market is saturated, and it's true that there are a lot of psychology students, so it's harder to find a job. I haven't had difficulties, and I don't think it's because I'm the best or something. I think it's also about really doing proper research on all the opportunities that are out there, because I do feel there are really a lot of opportunities for psychologists.
So you mentioned that the work you do on a day-to-day is pretty broad, but it always entails a conversation. What do you like most about your job, and what keeps you going like day to day?
Yeah.
Because I can imagine talking to people every day is tiring. At least for me, like I have like one client call a day, and I'm like, please let me get back to like doing other work, because the conversation's always like, it's a lot of energy exchange, right? Like you have to go to a place and you're talking with them, and then they have all their worries and stuff, and they'll like let them onto you, especially in your work. Like, how does that go?
The conversations are pretty intense, pretty deep. And I actually often get that question also from clients who are like, how do you do this like for such an extended amount of time? I would be so tired. But I then think that it's something in me that I don't get tired of it. Like at the end of the day, I can definitely feel a bit of like, okay, I'm physically a little bit tired, but I never feel like that it's a strain or something. So that's what keeps me going, is actually also the variation of the things that you hear, the way that you engage with people. I think I would have the opposite, that if I have a monotonous occupation, I don't do well. I know, because I've also, like I've done, for example, internships where I would do more like computer work, and the physical sensation I get from that is just, it's hard to describe, but I get super understimulated and I'm just not my best self, and I think people around me can then also see it. Whereas with this, it's pretty intense, but it just really works for me and for how I'm wired. So I really like all the everything that comes with it.
It's amazing to hear. That's the goal, right? To find something that doesn't feel like work at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think at least when I talk to you, like you always have something to say about how your day was or how exciting it was to talk with that person. Or and I can also imagine by talking to all these people, you're living different lives. I know that's a good way to mention it, but
I see what you mean.
Like you're living all these different lives and you see it also evolve over time.
Yeah.
Of course, when you have friends, like they'll tell you a thing or two, but like now you really go into like the depths because you need to know like what's going on at the roots or the core of the problem to understand it.
Yeah,
and
true.
then the people that you talk to extended period of time, right? Like 10-week trials, trajects of like 10 weeks, several months.
For sure, yeah.
How does that contribute to your own personal development? Because I can imagine by living all these different lives, you learn so much as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because as human beings, we get like one life and one identity. And I feel like with my job, I've sort of found a hack to also get like other perspectives and feel like, okay, I can also walk in other people's shoes. So what someone would learn over a lifetime of their own life, I feel like I can also get a lot of wisdom from other people's trajectories and the lessons that they are learning. So it's very enriching. Absolutely.
So we talked about what the writing would what are the important things to look at when you want to pick a study. Yeah. Imagine someone is thinking about doing psychology. What are some things, or linguistics for that matter, because you did both?
Yeah.
What do you think would be some things that people would have to ask themselves or have to look at within them about what they like or their passions to decide if psychology or linguistics would be a good path for them? Yeah,
right. Those are two different subjects, by the way. So maybe different things would apply for those different studies.
Maybe let's focus on psychology for this because that's also what you do now most.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at psychology, I would if I first look at it practically, I would advise them to speak to as many psychologists as possible because psychology is very broad. There are many different jobs that you can end up in as a psychologist and many different modes in which you can do those jobs. I'm independent now, but you can also work for a big organization, for a small organization, in a school. There's so many different ways that you can go. So I would recommend them to embark on this journey of really exploring and take their time for it and speak to as many people as possible. If they wanted to do what I do mostly, I think the type of personality, well, if you also have this curiosity for people, that really, helps is a small word, like that really drives you and makes this work a lot of fun. Like you do something for the people that you help, but you also get something back because you're learning so much. So it's very satisfying if you have that inborn curiosity for others and for what drives people, and also being open-minded, I think, is very, very important, because you encounter a lot of things that might also not be in accordance with your own lifestyle, your own beliefs, but the openness to really engage with that and to also see how it affects you or how it triggers you, and to be able to face that is very important. So I would say that self-reflection, someone who can self-reflect very well, would also make a very suitable psychologist. This curiosity that I'm saying.
I also feel like different people need different psychologists. So for everyone, everyone will have their own way to do it. Of course, there are certain teachings that you have to apply and certain rules you have to obey when you're being a psychologist, because of course it's a title that you have to really be proud of and you have to represent it. But I feel like, just looking at myself, like if I have, for example, friends that run big businesses and they have psychologists just to help them overcoming what's it called when you don't feel like you belong somewhere.
Imposter syndrome?
Yeah, the imposter syndrome. Psychologists just for that.
Oh, cool.
And those are often
that's
men
a big topic,
that worked in big companies and that now did some courses, and now they're giving these classes in psychology for people that are doing business. So it's so broad. Or also see people doing a lot of entrepreneurs that I know have done NLP
Yeah.
courses. I think
Yeah.
neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah, yeah,
Is that psychology, or does that fall under psychology?
Not under the evidence-based approaches, I think, but I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that it's a thing that is helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just so cool to see that it's so broad,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
that everyone can benefit from it. And I think also
Yeah.
everyone can benefit from talking to a psychologist.
mm-hmm.
But that's another topic that we can talk about later after.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what you say, so different types, I would totally agree with that, because you really also have a big variation of the types of therapists. I myself, I have to do supervision as a psychologist, so that means that I regularly also talk to another psychologist about my work, how it affects me, and someone I can brainstorm with about cases. And I also noticed that within those people, there is such a big variation. So now I have a supervisor who is more provocative, and that's more his approach, and that works incredibly
What does that look
well.
like in the day-to-day?
Yeah, so that you really dare to challenge the client. So you kind of look for the borderline of where you can provoke someone, not with the goal of hurting them or something, but of exactly to reflect. And when done well, and the supervisor does it very well, it's a very good approach. But I think that suits him very well as a person, whereas someone like me, I'm more agreeable. I'm in my temperament, so that would be, who knows, maybe I would become more provocative over the years. But now my style is different than his style, for example. And it depends on how you're wired yourself, what you look for in a therapist.
If there's any advice you could give yourself, like your beginning as a psychologist, what would it be?
Yeah. Definitely enjoy the process, because it's a lot of fun. More fun than I could even imagine at the start. And I would tell myself a very important part of our work is relating authentically to clients. And then, of course, you also apply all the knowledge that you have and the theories. But I would like give myself that confidence that already with being present and being there for the people and really connecting with them on a human-to-human level, that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that's also something that in today's world is missing a little bit. Not just talking about psychologists, but also just like from people around you, like genuinely asking like how someone is doing. I think we do that too little in this society. And that's something that I've really like noticed like over the years myself. I'm like, I haven't talked to this person for so long, like I need to check up on them. Yeah. And that can do wonders, because you never know what goes on the other side.
For sure.
Of course, when someone goes to psychology or goes to a psychologist for a session, they're already pretty far in their journey, because they notice that they have to talk to someone, or they already took a step. A lot of people are scared and are afraid, and for them it's too big of a step, or you don't know what's playing. Yeah. So just checking up on people regularly and just listening. You don't even have to give advice. Like just listening to someone, I think can make a big difference. Yeah. I don't know how you experience that, because I can imagine like if I would talk to a psychologist myself about things that I'm dealing with, for me, or just someone listening to me would already be like, but they have to like, of course,
really listen,
listen, like not just look at me like, indeed,
and really find it
you
like
feel
engaging.
That if someone actually cares. But I think also with friends, the same thing, right?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And it's important to normalize those types of conversations and to have the people around you feel that when it's necessary, they're always welcome to have that level of interaction.
We talked about you. Now we'll talk about your expertise and things that you see when you're working in the field. Yeah. What I'm curious about, because of course you've done a lot of different things and you talked to a lot of different people, so maybe it's hard to answer this question. That's fine. Okay. But what are some common issues or topics that you see that come up often in the sessions that you have? Yeah. Is there like a red line in that, or is it like very different?
Every situation is different. But what I see a lot is people having difficulties relating to one another. If I make it very broad and look at a red line, so interpersonal issues. And often even when someone comes in with a question that doesn't look interpersonal at first. I don't know, I have anxiety all the time and I don't know what to do about it. Oftentimes you do later see that, there is an interpersonal component.
What is interpersonal?
Relationships.
Okay.
So how someone relates to the people around them. And it can be close relationships, it can be romantic relationships. But that's a thing a topic that comes up a lot, how people relate to one another and how can people relate better to one another.
How can they relate better to one another? Because I think that's something that's very interesting to talk about.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So what I've had to learn as a psychologist, and this is part of our training, is to people often come with problems outside of relationships. So things that they want a solution for. Maybe a couple comes in and they both have a decision to make, and then they go all in on this decision, the content of the problem. And they sometimes lose eye for what is happening between them. So to answer that question, something that I've had to learn as a therapist is to, during the therapy, yes, there is this problem, and yes, to some level we can talk about it, but we really have to focus on what is happening between the two of you, or like the four of you, if it's a family, or if it's an individual, you talk about what is happening between them and the people around them, while they're on their quest to solve like problem X. So to not lose sight, sometimes you have sort of a goal in mind of something that you want to achieve or solve. And sometimes people lose sight of how they relate to the people around them.
And do I understand correctly that then you have to slow down everything a little bit? Like you have to look at the things that have been said, have been done, look a little bit at the past, look at how it's now, instead of, how can we fix this?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. Yeah. To zoom out and to observe more, okay, what is happening between us? How does my approach affect you? And how does your approach affect me? And if it affects us in a bad way, what do we want to do about that between the two of us? So to be really mindful of how people affect one another.
I can imagine for someone to tell you all these things that are very personal, it's a bit hard. How do you ensure that the person that's sitting across from you at the table knows that they can trust you and tell you all these things?
I don't know if I consciously do something for that.
A big smile.
I smile. I'm genuinely interested. I think that helps. I've heard people say that I'm very calm, and oftentimes when there are things going on, people have they're a bit stressed, and so being with someone who speaks calmly and who is calm has a soothing effect. Yeah, I don't know exactly.
I think that's a good thing that you don't know exactly, because that means that's authentic.
Yeah.
Like it's not, you don't have like a checklist, like, these are things I do so someone can trust me.
No.
Like if you would ask me, I would give you a different answer. Like for us in media, and like when we want to sell something to someone, imagine social media strategy, of course, we have a long list of clients and we have a track record of proven results, so that helps. Yeah. But in order to build trust, like there's a way you have to sit, and there's a way you talk to someone, and there's a way you have to be really sure of what you're saying. Like there's all these things that I actively do. Of course, at some point it becomes a subconscious, but at the beginning I'm like, I have a checklist of things I have to do during this meeting for me to come across authentic. Okay. I can only do that, of course, because I know that the work we deliver is good and we hold ourselves to a certain standard. But at the very beginning, I was like faking things. I'll make up things and I would do all these things. Now, thankfully, that doesn't have to happen anymore, because we've done the work and we can do it. Yeah. But I think it's so good that you can't like put a finger on it, because that just means that you're just being yourself. Yeah. And I guess. Yeah. All the other clients you have are your track record, and if the fact that they were able to tell you what's going on, and that's just good, I think. Yeah. So, that's true. It's a good sign. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Well, I had another thought that came up. But that's not necessarily something to build trust. But what I've heard is that it's very important when you work with someone to be able to, as a therapist, to imagine their full potential, their best version. Ooh. So if you yourself, it's very important that you yourself, as a therapist, can look at someone, even if they're rock bottom, and you can see and you can imagine their best self. I think that there was this quote from Joe Rogan. He said, I like success stories, but what I like even more are people that are at rock bottom.
Yeah.
And from there on, they start working their way up.
Yeah.
And he said the way you have to view your life is like a documentary.
Cool.
And you have to write it from all things that are going wrong now and what goes on now and how you're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And how you're going to work your way up, work your way up. And that was such a beautiful video. We can actually put it like in the podcast.
Yeah.
That was the video. It's so cool. Like, and I think that's also, as a psychologist, you help someone do that. At least for me, when I've had talks with you, because of course you're a psychologist, but you're also my sister, but the way we have a relationship is a little bit in between, because I often come with things that I'm struggling with and I talk to you.
Yeah.
And then I often realize like, oh yeah, there's so much I can still do and so much I can still accomplish. And I get like a lot of like, you're not even giving me answers, but because I'm talking to you and I feel that you're listening, like I start imagining this full potential, and then it gives me like strength to continue.
Nice.
And that's not because you tell me, oh, Younes, you're so good and you're so smart. It's like you just listen and you're like, oh, but have you thought about this and have you thought about that? And because I start thinking and you ask me the right questions, I come up with the answer myself. At least I feel like that's what you do.
Nice. Nice.
Is that what you want to do as a psychologist often? Because I feel like you guys are not really there to give solutions. You're like there to make our brain think, because we often know more than we know in general. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, this also goes back to this thing where you don't want to just focus on, okay, there is problem X and then there is solution Y and therapist gives you a solution and then everything is solved. It doesn't work like that, because it's more of a process. And so indeed, like it's very difficult sometimes when you see someone dealing with something and you have your own ideas about it and you want to say maybe do this or something, but that's not what we do. So indeed, like you build a hypothesis, you ask certain questions, and in that way you bring out the potential of the person and the desire of the person as well, what they really want.
How do you deal with someone that is very resistant to change and they have identified that there's something that they want to work on, but then they realize that, or they tell you like, actually, I don't think I want to change or I can't change.
Yeah.
How do you go on with that? Because I can imagine that also happens.
For sure. So indeed, like the what's important in those situations is that you don't start fighting with the person and saying like, no, you can't change, but you make an observation that someone is talking, saying things like this. And then it makes me think of the fixed and the growth mindset. So I start like explaining about these different types of mindsets. You have the fixed mindset where you think, okay, how I am now is just how I am, and that's not going to change. And you have the growth mindset, and that's the mindset where it's like, oh, I cannot do it yet. So it means that you do believe that there is always potential for growth and for change. And just by telling people about those things and having them like see where they stand, what mindset suits them, then they have a choice to see if maybe they want to adopt more of the growth mindset.
Nice. What I want to ask you, Louisa, is of course you've been doing this now for a long time and you see certain things maybe changing in the psychology world. What do you think is going with psychology? Because I think now, especially from the very hectic period we have that we just passed, a lot of people were at home for a long time.
Yeah.
I think children at some point were locked in their house for like 2 years and they grew up with like a smartphone glued to their hands.
Yeah.
I think that will cause immense amount of problems in the future that we don't even know what they are now. How do you see the psychology world evolving in the future, and how do you think that will all play out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a feeling when I look around me that there is a lot more demand for it. So people, it's kind of funny because our society, on the one hand, there is so much like that things are more anonymous and more impersonal. Sometimes it feels like that with technology and with busy lifestyles. And at the same time, I do feel like a lot more people actually want to address topics around mental health and want to open up and want to speak, but are looking for a good outlet when it comes to that. So that in and of itself is a positive and maybe a reaction to those other societal trends. Yeah. So I think that that is going to be more normalized, going to therapy.
Okay.
And I also hope that outside of therapy, that it's more normalized to have these conversations outside of the therapy room. So with your loved ones, with your family, with your partner, with your friends, with strangers, like why not? That's also always what I advise my clients. Like it's really great to have therapy and to speak with a professional, and it's really good if you can do that outside of the therapy as well and foster that level of connection and trust with the people around you, because I think that really brings growth and healing for people.
Yeah, that's great. I think also, like, the older I get, I've also started to do things more slowly a little bit. Of course, business is going well and all these things are going well, and I've always been like, go, we need more podcasts, more clients, more trips to going somewhere across the world to do a shoot with some fighter for a documentary.
Yeah.
That's all great. But at some point you know that that's possible, and you know, okay, we have the knowledge and we have the intel to do these things. But if I'm not feeling myself like I'm feeling good, I'm not like I have these like unsolved things that are in my head, like at some point it will like bite you back very hard. So for me what worked really well is like slowing everything down a little bit.
Yeah.
And taking time to talk to people. And not besides you, I talked to a psychologist for the first time like 2 weeks ago. That was so good.
Nice.
Like I have to say I didn't find like a good personal click with the psychologist I was talking to, because I felt it was a bit like cold.
That's very important.
It was like it felt like a very clinical setting where it's like almost like a doctor.
Yeah.
And like, so, oh, what are your symptoms?
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to do to fix it. Like for me that doesn't work. So that's why I said like there are different psychologists that have
and
like
different approaches.
different approaches.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But they were also just doing their best, right? Like they were doing what they can, and I'm grateful for that conversation.
Yeah.
But I think everyone can benefit from it. And especially by doing this, I think for me also it puts myself in a position where like, okay, I want to actually better myself and I want to work on myself. And by doing that, I put myself in a position where I have to actually do that. And I have to say it's very out of my comfort zone. I'm talking about it like I just went there and I was like, let's do it.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about this, doing it for like the last 3 years, but I never went because I was like, I don't need that. I have friends to talk about. I have my sister. I have like colleagues I can talk to.
Yeah.
And in this case, I was like, no, like maybe it will be good. And after doing that, like I started writing things down and doing all these things. And
amazing.
It didn't come from that conversation specifically, but because I'm actively doing it, I feel like there's a need to like actually explore that more.
Yeah.
And that worked great.
Yeah.
So
that's really good to
bless
hear.
all the psychologists. Big up.
Amazing. Yeah.
Is there any general advice you would want to give everyone to work a little bit better on themselves and to maybe people, just general advice you would give people?
Yeah. What ties back to what I just said, I think would be advice like don't underestimate the importance of connection and of connecting with others. So really, like if you're in doubt, reach out to people, even if you feel like a bit uncomfortable. That can really be a bit outside of a comfort zone to open up about certain things where maybe you haven't had those types of conversations with those types of friends, but by doing that, you also open the door for another level of depth in your relationships. So that's a big one. And something that can also be, at least that's an insight I personally have found very useful, and that often comes back in therapy, because people are often, they're working towards a certain goal, or they're looking forward to a certain event, and they're hoping for a certain outcome, and there comes a lot of anxiety with that, because if it doesn't happen the way that I have in mind, then I'm very disappointed, or world falls apart. In those conversations, I talk a lot about process versus result. So yes, there is a certain result that you want to achieve, a certain goal that you want to get, and you can focus completely on that. But what if we shift the perspective and we make the goal and we look at, okay, how do I want to feel on the other side of that goal or that event? And you kind of shift the goal into, I want to be able to look back and with the full knowledge that I've done my best, that I did everything I could, and that I don't regret the process, how I went through the process. So then you shift the perspective from the outcome, the result of that one thing, to how you live the process. And that can give a lot of relief to people.
Yeah, the journey.
Yeah.
I think that's also most valuable when I look back at things I've experienced. Always like the outcome is not important, it's the journey. People you met along, the people you met like during that period. We also watched a documentary together. It was called Kaizen.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about, we're going to wrap up the podcast soon, but maybe you can talk about Kaizen and what that is. Like that, I think it's a lifestyle almost, right? Or life philosophy.
Yeah. It's a great documentary about a guy that did like a lot of mountain climbing and had these goals, and he went to Japan. And Kaizen, I think, was a Japanese concept of going slowly but steadily. And that also really emphasizes the process and honoring the process and taking the time that you need to really have an honorable and good process that you can be proud of. And then whatever result comes out of that is what it should be, because you gave it everything you could.
Goosebumps. I think that's a very nice way to approach life. And I think it's also a good way to ensure just being competitive over time. Like people focus on what can I do for 2 weeks, but you have to look at 10 years, decades. Like that's how you plan things. Yeah. Good things don't happen in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like you saw all these e-commerce guys and people are doing like this trading, like, oh, I became rich really fast and this and that. What do you learn from that? Exactly nothing. Like I think having like this long journey where you evolve over time, I think that's what you learn most from, and I think that's a good way to view life. So we have a question that we always ask at the end of the podcast, and that would be, what does success mean to you?
Yeah, interesting question. I would say success is being able to wake up in the morning and to be proud of the life that you're living of, to feel like you wake up and you feel, oh yeah, I have a meaningful life.
And for people that at this moment in time don't feel that, what would your advice be? Because I think realizing that you're not in the path that you want to have, but working towards that also is a good way to look at it, right?
Absolutely. I think that this thing with finding meaning doesn't mean that you have to have a happy life and only then it's good. Yeah. If you have a certain form of suffering in your life, that can also be very meaningful, because in those periods of suffering, that's when we grow most and when we learn most. So I think it still applies in that case where you can ask yourself, okay, how is this going to shape me? What do I want to do with this challenge that I'm facing?
Beautiful. That's a good way to end the podcast. Of course, we can talk for hours and hours, brother and sister, and we know everything about each other. I think we're going to have many more podcasts, maybe even in a different setting as a co-host, maybe, if you're down.
Sounds good.
I think that would be cool to psychoanalysis one of our guests that we have on the table.
That could be fun, yeah.
So thank you so much. We're excited to see where you're going to go with everything you're doing. And thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much.